Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening from. My name is Eric, and this is the Five Head Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the 6th episode of the Five Head Podcast. If you're listening for the first time, go ahead and check out episodes 1 through 5 on YouTube, Spotify, Buzzsprout, wherever you get your podcasts from. Be sure to like, subscribe, share. Costs you nothing, really helps a brother out. And if you need to reach out to me for anything, it's eric.middleviewmedia@gmail.com, eric.middleviewmedia@gmail.com. Now, I want to start this episode talking a little bit about income taxes and how they don't really affect the rich at all. They don't negatively affect the rich when taxes go up, and they don't help the rich when taxes go down. But what's funny about it is both of our political parties will use income taxes, eliciting votes and support for their budget plans. And both sides look at income taxes two different ways. Or not look at income taxes in two different ways, but sell the idea whether or not to support income tax cuts in two different ways. So on the right, the theory is income tax cuts means more money in everyone's pockets, as less money is taken out of everyone's paycheck. The theory on the left is income tax cuts make it harder for us as a society to provide the social benefits for the people who truly need it. Instead of income tax cuts, we should be raising taxes on the richest of our society. And on their face, both of those arguments, I guess you could say, or both of those viewpoints are true. Income tax cuts across the board do make everyone's paycheck go up. Tax raises on the top 1% would give the government more money to provide benefit programs to people in society who truly need it. So neither of those things are technically incorrect, but neither of those correct arguments or correct viewpoints are acknowledged by either side, as they're trying to garner support for the reason they want to not cut, or raise taxes. And that's why the rich is the target when it comes to tax cut debates, especially for the side that wants to vote no on tax cuts. So we look at the latest policy revolving tax cuts. Happens to be the one big beautiful bill that Trump signed off on. And of course, the right is selling it as this is going to put more money in everyone's pocket. And the left is selling it as this is a tax cut for the rich. So for the right, it was easy. We should support this because we want everyone to get a tax cut. And for the left, their focus was making sure everyone was against it because it supposedly gives the rich a tax cut. I want to make it clear, of course, our tax laws affect the rich. What's taxable and what's not 100% affects all of us the same. However, income taxes is where the game is played, and it's income taxes that don't benefit or hurt the rich when they go up or down. So you can raise the income tax at the highest tax bracket to 100%, the rich aren't paying it. You can lower the tax percentage on the highest income tax bracket, and it's not helping the rich. Why? Because the rich don't pay income taxes. I know how that sounds, but it's true. When we say income taxes, we think any money we have coming in being taxed. But from an IRS standpoint, from a tax classification standpoint, income tax is very specific. Income usually means money earned through a salary paid by a company to an employee. Our top 1% doesn't earn a salary. They don't earn money classified as a salary, and therefore, income taxes don't really affect them at all. As a matter of fact, if you make more than $1 million a year and you're taking that pay as a salaried employee, you're stupid, because salaries are the highest taxed form of money earnings in the country, by far the highest taxed. So if some company is willing to pay you $1 million a year for your services, you're going to take that pay in a different way. If they're willing to pay you that much, just off the rip, come work for us, we'll give you $1 million a year. Okay. I'll take $170,000 in salary, and I'll take the rest in dividends or profit share or bonuses. Because capital gains tax on assets is lower than income taxes. And if you want me to come work for you, that's how I'm going to take the pay. A lot of times people who make that much money, it's because they run a business, whether it's a self-employed business or they're working off some kind of contract or they're working off some kind of, not gig, but their pay varies based on their performance. Like they're selling something, they get a commission for it. And those things are all taxed differently than income taxes. And it's funny seeing posts about this. You've got your few usual hardcore left or rights on social media who talk about this stuff all the time. If you've ever heard of Robert Reich, all he talks about is how the rich is screwing over the country and how they pay barely any taxes on the money that they have. So he'll put out posts talking about how this corporation only paid 3% in income taxes. This corporation paid 0. This corporation paid taxes throughout the year, but then got a huge tax return. So therefore paid negative taxes, meaning tax dollars were actually given to them. And he goes on and on almost every single day about corporations and specifically rich people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who he claims pays 2, 3, maybe 5% of their income in taxes, when the rest of us, a teacher they like to use, pays an average of 16.5%. But then he kind of contradicts himself when he talks about potential tax cuts. He'll say if the highest income tax rate is lowered down to 20%, that's going to save this many billions for all the rich people, because instead of paying 30%, now they're only paying 20%, which saves them millions and billions of dollars. And it's unfair because even when taxes go down for the middle and lower economic classes, it doesn't save us that kind of money. But that doesn't make any sense. If taxes for the highest bracket classified as income is 35%, yet people in that bracket are actually only paying 0 to 3%, then dropping that tax rate for that bracket down to 20% doesn't help them in any way. So it doesn't matter if they lower the taxes. It actually doesn't save those rich people any money because they were never paying upwards of 20% or more anyway. And it's the same the other way around. If taxes for the highest income bracket are at 20% and the next president comes in, says the rich need to pay more, we're raising that to 50%, doesn't matter. They're already not paying 20%. They're not going to pay another 30% on top of that because they're not earning an income. If Jeff Bezos took a salary from Amazon, he would be in one of the income brackets, which these tax cuts would affect or tax raises would affect. But he's not. The reason why he's paying 0 in taxes is because he's taking his pay in stocks and dividends and different pass-through mechanisms. So it's not classified on a tax return as income. So anyway, if someone makes the claim that the rich are already paying no taxes at all, or 0 to 3%, while the rest of us pay an average of 16 to 22% or whatever, then it's a contradiction to claim that a lowering of the top income tax bracket is going to save them any money. So either they are paying 35% now, and a tax cut to 20% would mean they are saving millions of dollars, or they don't pay anywhere near 20% anyway, so no matter what you do with that top rate actually doesn't affect them. And when you try to comment that with these large social media influencers who are preaching these two contradicting things every day, there's no response. Now, I get when someone has 500,000 followers and each post they put out gets thousands of comments. There's no way they're going to see every comment. There's no way they're going to be able to answer every comment. I get that. But still, there's never seems to be an answer for that. Only one of those things can be true. Either the income tax cuts help them or they don't matter anyway. Either they're paying 0 and the tax cut doesn't affect them, or they're currently paying 37%, which means they are paying more than a teacher, and the tax cuts do help them if they come down to 20, 22, 25%, but it's still more than a teacher as well in percentage. Both of those things can't be true at the same time, and most people know it's the former that is true, that the rich aren't paying anywhere near those tax rates on income anyway. So when they say no to a tax cut, they're saying no to the rest of us. Even when someone like Elizabeth Warren or Nancy Pelosi says the rich need to pay their fair share, we need to lessen the burden of the middle and lower economic classes by making the rich pay their fair share. You ever notice their plan to do that is to tax the rich more? It's never to cut our taxes. So it wouldn't actually be lessening our burden. Our burden would be the same. The amount of taxes coming out of our paycheck would be the same as it is now. It's just the rich would have less money. And now some people are happy with that. Perfectly understandable. Some people are happy the rich should be taxed to oblivion. And I'm not trying to change anyone's mind on that. That's just how people feel. If you're worth $1 billion, why can't you be worth 900 million and have 100 million go back into the pool to help everyone out? Sure, I completely get that argument. But they never propose lowering actual taxes for the rest of us. And it's so funny to me how against some people are in lowering taxes. When Biden expanded the child tax credit or gave it as an advance, it was essentially $300 a month to people who have kids through the child tax credit that they already get. But instead of getting it on the tax return, you were getting it for 6 months in advance. And according to Biden and everyone else, that brought 50% of children out of poverty. Now, no one actually drives through impoverished neighborhoods after that child tax credit advance and said, look, it's 50% empty now. Half of the kids that were living in poverty are no longer living in poverty. No, of course not. They're able to make that claim, though, because at the time, the poverty line was right about $34,000. So officially, if you lived in a household that made less than $34,000 a year, you were considered to be living in poverty. The thing is, the majority of the country, household-wise, statistically, I'm not making this up, statistically, the majority of the country, household-wise, makes more than $34,000 a year. So where the 50% came from was that since most of the people make more than $34,000 a year, the majority of the people who are under that poverty line, and we're talking about households that have to live off that money, not just students working a part-time job, but the majority of people who have to live off of their household income that are making less than $34,000 a year, we're making darn near close to it. So when you get an extra $300 for 6 months, that's $1,800 extra dollars of income that you get that year. So if you were making $33,000 a year, and then they counted that extra $1,800 you got for that 6 months on top of that, now you're making $34,800, which puts you over the poverty line. So you're not counted in the statistics as living in poverty. So you and your kids will have then be said to be brought out of poverty, even though you're making $800 a year more than what the poverty line is. So does $300 a month for 6 months actually change anyone in poverty's life? No, of course not. But it was enough to get 50% of the people who are living below that poverty line just above it, so they're not counted as living in poverty, so they can then claim, look, 50% of people were raised out of poverty with these child tax credits. And my point in bringing it up is people who are against tax cuts were celebrating the idea of a tax credit for $300 a month for 6 months. And I don't get the disconnect between people who are for tax cuts and people who are against tax cuts. Because what's the difference between $300 a month in a child tax credit and $300 a month in a tax cut? It's the same $300 a month for that household. Do you get what I mean? And I would argue a tax cut that lowers people's taxes by $300 a month is better than a tax credit of $300 for 6 months, because tax cuts would be permanent. So if $300 a month credit for 6 months can bring 50% of the children in poverty out of poverty, then imagine what a permanent tax cut of $300 a month for every month, not just 6 months, but for every month could do for the children who are living in poverty. Income tax cuts are always portrayed as revolving around the rich. The rich are going to benefit, or we'll finally hurt the rich. And it's driven people to be like, yeah, I don't want the rich getting the tax cut, so therefore I don't want one either, which is absolutely crazy to me. But that was the excuse for people who wanted to vote no against the one big beautiful bill. Other than just politics in general, when you're the opposing party and the bill is being proposed by the opposing party, you're naturally going to want to go against it and find reasons to go against it, because every bill ever passed is going to have pros and cons to it. And pros and cons are going to come to fruition. And when the cons come to fruition, you as a politician of the opposing party don't want to have your name on that bill when those cons that came to fruition are used in the next election cycle against everyone who signed off on that bill. That's essentially what it is. All the pros that come to fruition when a bill is passed will be used by the people who signed off on that in the next election cycle, and all the cons that come to fruition will be used to try to win against those people come the next election. So in a general sense, when there's one party control and they're trying to pass a bill, it's better politically for you to say no. I get that. What I don't get is voters who buy into all of that. Tax credits or money in the form of a benefit is better in some way than money in hand on each person's paycheck. I mean, at the very least, you can argue, isn't it the same thing? Isn't $300 a month tax credit the same thing as a $300 a month tax cut? So why would you be against that? But to my original point, you have to understand tax cuts don't affect the rich. They are not paying that top percentage anyway. They're taking their income in stocks. They're taking it in bonuses. They're taking it in capital gains. More and more lately, the rich are taking it in stock assets. And then they're borrowing money off of those stock assets, and loans aren't taxable. And then they're taking enough in income, in actual income like you and I, to make payments on those loans, which they can then write off so it lowers their tax burden at the end of the year. What's funny is everyone who's against income tax cuts, because they say it helps the rich, and we need to raise income taxes to go after the rich for more money, haven't raised capital gains tax or haven't fixed the workarounds that the rich use, like borrowing money off assets to force them to pay more. It's almost gaslighting. We voted no on tax cuts because we don't want to give the rich a tax break. When you say no to a tax cut, you're saying no to a tax cut for me, for my wife, for 99% of the people who earn a living off what's classified as income by the IRS. Never actually propose actual tax cuts for the rest of us, so it actually lessens our burden. You never see the rich's taxes get raised in the form of a raise in the capital gains tax rates. As a matter of fact, the amount of money in each bracket for capital gains seems to go up every year. So there's a higher limit to each lower tax bracket in the capital gains tax brackets every year. So you almost feel like they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. I care about the middle class so much that I'm going to say no to giving the middle class a tax cut, because that's really what it is. And of course, we let politics get in the way of it. So there's a lot of tax provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill that are very beneficial to the middle and lower economic classes, like an expansion of the child tax credit, which people praised Joe Biden for. And I really feel like we need to get out of this. I don't like the politician. I hate that that politician is in power. Therefore, I'm going to go against every policy that gets pushed, even when the policy actually benefits you and the majority of the middle and lower economic classes. We should be able to openly discuss that, hey, this was actually a good tax cut for the middle and lower economic class. And even though there's a tax cut in there for the rich as well, the rich aren't paying anywhere near that percentage anyway. We shouldn't just buy into this argument that this is just such a huge tax break for the rich. It's going to save them millions of dollars. No, it's not. They weren't paying the old income tax rate. They're not paying the new income tax rate. They're already paying less than that. That money is already saved. And we should be able to identify that without worrying about sounding like you're on the team of the other side, because it's not true. So next time you have a local politician running for a local seat or on a national scale, and they say they're going to stick it to the rich and make the rich pay their fair share, ask them how. Because raising the income tax rates is not going to do it. They don't pay those tax rates when they're low. They're not going to pay them when they're higher. Ask them how they're going to do that. Are they going to change the capital gains tax rates? Are they going to find a way to tax loans based on non-liquid assets? Because unless they do all of those things, they're not raising the taxes on the rich. And if that's the case anyway, you should tell them, you know what? I want you to pass more tax cuts then. Why can't the rest of us have the capital gains tax rates like the rich do? Why can't the rest of us borrow money off of our worth and write that off on our own personal taxes? Why can't we all be taxed like a corporation? Why is my pay throttled? Because when my employer hires me, they have to account for paying payroll taxes. of which half comes out of my paycheck. So therefore, they can't give me a higher salary. Why do I have to go through that when the rich can get around all of that? That's the question you should ask. And if they're not willing to raise capital gains tax rates, if they're not willing to find a way to tax borrowing money off non-liquid assets, show you how they're going to get the rich to pay their fair share, as they say, then it's all BS. And you should tell them, you know what? I'd rather you just lower our taxes. I'd rather you lower income taxes. And what's funny is when I have conversations like this, people say I sound like I'm like on the side of the rich and I'm sticking up for the rich. And why do I love billionaires and love the rich so much? And I don't. I could care less, to be honest with you. If I woke up tomorrow and found out Jeff Bezos is worth $0 now, I don't care. Him losing all of his money overnight doesn't affect me. But that's kind of my point. How much money Jeff Bezos has doesn't affect me. What the income tax rate is for someone who makes what Jeff Bezos makes, even though they don't pay income taxes, doesn't affect me. And that's one of the points I'm trying to make. Not only do those income tax rates don't affect the rich, how they do or don't affect the rich doesn't affect you. If you woke up tomorrow and the highest income tax bracket was 100%, and they applied that to all of the income, all of the profits that all the rich make in any way, shape, or form, that doesn't help you at all. The same amount of money on your next paycheck that goes out to taxes is going to come out. The bill you have due on the first of the month is still going to be due. Your salary is still going to be the same. Bringing the rich down doesn't bring the rest up. So that's what I have to say about income taxes. Raising income taxes doesn't hurt the rich. Lowering income taxes doesn't help the rich. The rich aren't paying those percentages anyway because they don't earn their money in what's classified via taxes as income. Lowering income taxes helps you and I. Raising income taxes hurts you and I. And that's all there is to it. Another crazy thing that's happened over the last week revolves around the Jeffrey Epstein files. This is kind of a bombshell. This is kind of a big deal. And yet there's been one news report on it in the mainstream media at MSNBC. And that is a New York judge has refused to unseal files from the case against Ghislaine Maxwell. So this is the second judge that refuses to unseal the files. The first one was a judge in Florida refusing to unseal files from a case back in 2005 to 2007 with Jeffrey Epstein. And now you've got a New York judge that is refusing to unseal files from Ghislaine Maxwell's most recent case that's landed her in jail. Now, if you've listened to any of my podcasts, you've heard me say in almost every episode that maybe, just maybe, there is no other evidence to go after anyone other than Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell for sexually assaulting these girls. Not that no one else did, but maybe there's just no other evidence that proves that other people have. So now we have files that were unsealed in January of 2024 that give no evidence that can lead to an arrest of anyone other than Epstein and Maxwell themselves. Most of it's redacted because it's private information about women who were minors at the time. But we saw flight logs all over the place. We've seen a bunch of pictures of Jeffrey Epstein with a bunch of different people at different social events. But nothing in those released or unsealed files in 2024 shows any evidence that could put other people behind bars for sexually assaulting these girls. And now in the latest judge deciding to not unseal the files, he literally said, the materials do not identify anyone other than Epstein and Maxwell who had sexual contact with a minor. That's a quote from the judge and why he won't release or unseal this batch of files. Why is there silence on this news? Except for the one report by MSNBC, and then that was it. Everyone just kind of ignored it. But this is huge news because, like I've said in other episodes, everyone is convinced that the politicians they don't like are in the Epstein files, and they're on a client list that is backed with evidence proving that said politician they don't like was raping children. Even though we all believe the politicians we don't like did that, and there's evidence of it, in 6 years, the DOJ has not made any other arrests. And now a federal judge is saying there is nothing in the files that are sealed that would tie anyone else to sexually assaulting these women through Jeffrey Epstein. And that can't be, right? It cannot be that the only ones who sexually assaulted these women were Epstein and Maxwell themselves. I mean, can it be? I mean, in theory, it could be. It could be this was a thing that they did, and they didn't tell anyone about it. It was a secret life they had, where they lured women in under the guise of working for them, kind of groomed them into performing sexual acts with them that they did not want, but it was only them. They didn't tell anyone else about it, and no one else knew about it. I mean, in theory, that could be true, but we don't believe that, right? But so far, no evidence is refuting that. The only thing we have refuting that are women who are claiming to have been Epstein victims coming forward and saying other people were involved in this. But there's been no evidence. That's just been hearsay. And of course, believe all women, investigate it, but there seems to be no evidence. The judges are now saying there is no evidence to tie any kind of sexual misconduct to anyone other than Epstein and Maxwell. I mean, unless the judges themselves, and these are different judges, they're covering it up for some reason. They don't want to get justice for the women. That doesn't make sense unless the judges themselves were on Epstein's island. But the likelihood of that, 3 different judges in 3 different states. So what is the answer here? Why do we have women who have publicly said they were one of Epstein's victims, claiming that there were multiple clients who sexually assaulted them and other women who were girls at the time, yet all of our official investigation documents are saying there's no evidence of this? I mean, I can't believe that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell would traffic a bunch of women and invite their clients to abuse these women and not keep any kind of video or audio or some sort of evidence to use as a get-out-of-jail-free card should they ever get caught. Unless they were completely stupid. But in order to run a sex trafficking ring for that long, you can't be stupid. In order to manage the money of millionaires and billionaires, you can't be stupid. So did they not kind of record or keep track of anything that could be used as evidence against others should they go down? Like, if we're going down, we're bringing everyone with us? Or in the 6 years that the DOJ has had all this evidence, has some evidence ended up missing before they can get to courts, before they can be sealed in courts, before a judge can look at them and say, there's no evidence of any kind of misconduct by anyone other than Maxwell and Epstein. So again, we're down to 2 options. Either there was no one else, and it really was just Epstein and Maxwell sexually abusing these women, and the women that are coming out now claiming that they were Epstein victims at the time are embellishing a bit, or there's a massive cover-up going on. A cover-up in where now it would appear if there is no evidence, it's because the evidence has been tampered with. And now this bombshell declaration by this judge saying there's nothing to unseal. And no one's talking about it. It's like I've said before, like, this will slowly start to get pushed back under the rug where it was. It was pushed under the rug during the entire Biden administration, as in the DOJ didn't make any arrests during the Biden administration to get justice for these women. They didn't talk about it, nothing. It just kind of went away. And then it was brought out from under the rug by Pam Bondi getting excited because she always felt like there's this list of politicians she doesn't like that the DOJ has, and now she's in charge of the DOJ. So she makes this big scene about how she's going to release the file. So she opens up, she takes it back out from under the rug, and now slowly but surely it's getting pushed under the rug again. Because now we're into gerrymandering, and now we're into 2026 midterms, and we're looking at the economy and the job numbers, and the amount of people screaming for the Epstein files is slowly dying down, even with a bombshell declaration by a judge like this and refusal to unseal the files. It's crazy to me. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, why aren't the victims screaming every single day on social media that they want justice for the people who wronged them? I guess that's an unfair question to ask because I don't know what it's like to be a victim like that. Maybe they want to see justice for the people who wronged them, but they don't want it public because, they want their privacy. So, unfair question by me. But it seems like the only time people are screaming for these files to be released is if they think it politically helps them in some way or helps the side that they vote for in some way. And did this judge just kind of shut the rest of this case down? This is the third judge now that has said we're not unsealing the files, there's nothing there. What does "there's nothing there" means? As far as anything official is concerned, there's no one else who sexually assaulted these women. No one but Epstein and Maxwell themselves, which means there is no evidence, or like I said, that evidence has been removed. So this has been either the biggest nothing burger of all time, and these poor women who were violated got their justice when Epstein died in prison and Maxwell went to jail, or this is one of the biggest cover-ups of all time. And I think everyone leans toward the cover-up, but again, I think that's just because deep in their hearts, they truly believe the politicians they don't like are all over these files. Not all over these files as in knew who Epstein was, went to the same country club, happened to be in the same social circles. No. Everyone believes the politicians they don't like are on a list, backed with indisputable evidence that they raped girls through Epstein. It's just, it's being swept back under the rug. Mark my words. Give it a few weeks, and the Five Head podcast will be the only thing talking about Epstein. It's crazy, and I think the media and people on social media need to talk about what this judge said again. Need to demand some answers on these files. Another kind of bombshell that's happened this week revolves around the authority of the president to deploy the National Guard. So as everyone knows, this week, Trump decided to deploy the National Guard and federal law enforcement, not just the National Guard, to D.C. to help with what he feels is a rampant crime issue. And I'm not going to get into the debate on how bad crime is in D.C. That's not what I'm talking about here. People can have that debate all they want. But what's crazy about him deploying the National Guard is it's given a lot of Democrats on social media a really good talking point. Why is it Trump claim he couldn't deploy the National Guard on January 6th? He didn't have the authority to, but he clearly had the authority to deploy the National Guard now. So what's the difference? And of course, when it comes to January 6th, the right is saying he tried to deploy the National Guard, but Nancy Pelosi wouldn't let him. The left has always said POTUS controls the D.C. National Guard, not Nancy Pelosi. He could have deployed them if he wanted to. The funny thing is, both sides are kind of correct on this. So I went ahead and did some research after Trump announced he was deploying the National Guard into D.C., and everyone started arguing about the authority again relating to January 6th. And what I found out is it's actually way more nuanced than people realize. So let me break down how this actually works. Yes, in a general sense, POTUS has the authority over the National Guard in the District of Columbia. Unlike in the 50 states across the country, governors usually have the authority over the National Guard. In D.C., the president does. However, the Capitol building and its grounds are not under the authority of the executive branch. The Capitol building and the Capitol grounds are under the authority of the legislative branch. POTUS has no authority on the Capitol building or its grounds. And security of the grounds is managed by the U.S. Capitol Police, reporting directly to the Capitol Police Board. So the chief of the U.S. Capitol Police cannot individually make security decisions when it comes to the U.S. Capitol and its grounds. Now, according to 2 U.S. Code 1970, at the time, this has since been changed, but at the time, January of 2021, according to this U.S. Code, to station or operate the D.C. National Guard troops on Capitol grounds, which is the legislative enclave, a request must typically originate from the U.S. Capitol Police Chief to that Capitol Police Board. The board must then formally ask the Department of Defense for assistance. This is after, so the board must approve it, and then they go to the Department of Defense and ask for the assistance. Once the board approves and DoD agrees to provide the assistance, the president can then deploy the troops onto the U.S. Capitol grounds and into the Capitol building. So on January 3rd, 3 days before J6, President Trump started that process. There was already a scheduled protest, and he wanted the National Guard there to help keep the peace, to make sure the protest didn't turn into riots like many of the protests have over the previous years before that. So through his police chief, or the DC police chief at the time, Chief Stephen Sund, Trump made the request on January 3rd, 3 days early, to start that process. And that request was denied by the board on January 3rd based on a view of optics, deploying troops to counter a protest. So it was denied. Now, former police chief Sund is saying that this is the sergeant at arms' fault. Now, the sergeant at arms reports directly to Pelosi. This is where Pelosi is getting blamed for this. DC Police Chief Sund said it was the sergeant at arms at the Capitol at the time that was delaying it getting to the board for a vote for approval. However, after the fact checks on that, a request did go to the board for approval on January 3rd, and it was denied due to optics, which the sergeant at arms also parroted as well, that they believed in optics this wasn't a good idea. Now, Nancy Pelosi claims she didn't know anything about it on January 3rd, and there's nothing to refute that, because all that would mean is while the DC police chief was requesting permission to allow the National Guard to be on the Capitol grounds through the board and through the sergeant at arms at the Capitol building, neither the board nor the sergeant at arms told Nancy Pelosi anything about it. So then fast forward to January 6th, stuff starts hitting the fan, and the police chief is requesting an emergency approval by the board to let the National Guard in. The board approved it at about 2:10 p.m., and then it went to the Pentagon to give the final approval and go ahead and deploy the troops. And it was the Pentagon who delayed it until after 5 p.m., quoting concerns about visuals. How does it look that a president is deploying the National Guard to the Capitol on the day that they are certifying his loss to the election? Imagine what that would look like. Imagine what people would say he was trying to do. He's trying to deploy the National Guard to not let them certify his election loss so he can take over as dictator. So it took the Pentagon until after 5 p.m., when everything was starting to die down, to finally approve the National Guard to come in and help the Capitol Police stop all the attacks that were happening on the grounds of the Capitol building. So if you're wondering how is it Trump is able to deploy the National Guard in D.C. this week, but wasn't able to do it on January 6th, that's why. POTUS doesn't have the authority to deploy troops onto the Capitol building grounds or into the Capitol building at all. The authority of those grounds is the legislative branch. Now, since then, the rule has been changed. Congress has changed the law now that allows the Capitol Police Chief to request a National Guard onto the Capitol grounds and into the Capitol building without the board approval. It can go directly to the Pentagon and make that request. And that's reserved for emergencies like on January 6th. The president does not have the authority to put troops into the Capitol building, but he has the authority to deploy troops into the actual city of D.C., which he's doing now. And it's causing quite a stir. It's kind of funny because, yes, there's crime in D.C. It's a big city. There's going to be crime. Reports are saying reported crimes are down. And if you live in this area and you've listened to local news and local radio and local independent journalists, they've been saying for years that crimes are just simply not being reported as they used to be. Prosecutions are down. They're refusing to prosecute certain crimes. So, again, I don't want to get into that debate over that because there's nothing to prove that reporting the crimes is down, that the crimes are still as high as they've always been the last few years. It's just it's not getting reported. It's not showing up on any paperwork because arrests aren't happening. Prosecutions aren't happening. There's no way to prove that. But if you live in this area and you listen to the local news, this has been looked into more than once over the last few years. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the difference between deploying the troops directly into DC like he's doing now, or specifically onto the grounds of a building or into a building that is controlled by someone else, not the executive branch. More entertainment this week has been the back and forth on Texas's decision to gerrymander. And I kind of put some hypotheticals together for you, so I'll get to that in a second. But what's been funny is Gavin Newsom has hilariously been trolling Trump on X. So we all know the story, right? Texas is doing an out-of-cycle redistricting, which they believe will lead to 5 flipped seats in the House of Representatives from Democrat to Republican. And that's the theory. I mean, at the end of the day, the candidates have to go win those votes. But still, that's the thought. That's the reasoning for redistricting. And it's out of cycle. That's why they're claiming gerrymandering. When, like I've said in other podcasts, I mean, any redistricting is technically gerrymandering because the party that is in power in the state legislature is going to try to district in a way that favors their party in the House of Representatives. Either way, Texas is doing it out of cycle. And so you've seen other states like California threaten that if Texas goes through with this, they will go ahead and propose redistricting in their state as well. But that's not what's been funny with Gavin Newsom. So on X, a lot of the people who dislike Trump have started referring to him as Taco this year. And if you don't know what that means, it stands for Trump always chickens out. And it refers to his very public and loud on both social media and on TV, threatening these countries with higher tariffs if they don't give better trade deals. And he usually gives them a date to come to the table by. And if they don't come to the table by that date, he's been giving them more time. And so people that don't like him on X have started calling him Taco. Trump always chickens out. So Gavin Newsom, I believe, truly does want to propose redistricting in California if Texas goes through with their current attempts to redistrict. So I believe he really wants to do that. He gave press conferences about it. However, he's trolling pretty hard because now he's putting out posts every few days in all capital letters and speaking in the way Trump would speak, no one does it better than me type thing, saying Trump has until XYZ date to tell Greg Abbott to stop the gerrymandering or else. And then that date comes and Gavin Newsom put out another tweet in all capital letters talking about how he's extending it and giving Trump more time, but he better, and this time he really means it. So he's trolling Trump through all of this. But the fact of the matter is, Texas is going to redistrict, and I believe other states are going to try to do the same in retaliation. Now, in the last episode of the podcast, I talked about how states should just do it. Why go out and talk about it? Just do it. Just redistrict. Who cares? I don't care, red or blue. It's your state. You have the power to do it. And then no one can complain about gerrymandering because everyone's doing it. But I decided to run some numbers because I found out that there are 9 blue states that have a bunch of Republicans in the state, 38% vote, 46% vote Republican, but have 0 seats in Congress. So their districts have been drawn so that no Republicans in those 9 states has a seat in Congress. However, on the flip side of that, there's also 11 red states where every district in that state has no Democrat representation in Congress. The percentages are a little different, especially in states like Wyoming that only has like 2 districts. It's a little different than like Massachusetts or whatever, but still, I wanted to see what would happen if states just out of cycle gerrymandered right now, just decided, you know what, we're redrawing these districts ahead of 2026. What that could potentially make Congress look like in the next session. So the first set of numbers I ran were based off the 2024 general election results by state. So every state Trump won in is considered a red state. Every state Kamala Harris won in is considered a blue state. So if all of the red states right now redrew their districts in a way that would lead to most likely every single district in the state being won by a Republican representative, and all the blue states redrew their district in a way that every single district in the state is most likely going to be won by a Democrat representative, then after 2026, the House of Representatives would have 250 Republicans and 185 Democrats. So then I decided to dive in a little deeper, because even though a state was red in the general election, means voted for Trump, doesn't mean that they would redistrict their entire state to red, because the state legislature could actually be controlled by Democrats. So I broke it down a little bit further than that, and I started collecting and running these numbers. If every state where Democrats have the power majority in the state legislature redistricted in a way that would most likely lead to Democrat representatives winning every single district in their state, and states with majority Republican legislature at the state level redistricted their maps so that most likely every single district in their state would go to a Republican representative, and states that are split at the legislature level, not controlled by either one party, would keep their current districts as they are now, and their representation would most likely be based off of the 2024 elections as they are today. If we ran it that way, the GOP would have 245 seats in the House of Representatives, and the Democrats would have 190 seats. So there's a real reason why Democrats, aside from the trolling, are upset about the idea of Texas doing this, because if every single state decided, you know what, we're going to do it too, then it looks like, based on current voting populace, it would give Republicans an even larger majority than they have now in the House of Representatives. And now, of course, that would change over time as more states' legislatures switch between red and blue, population moves, etc. But if that was done today, every single state would just gerrymander out of cycle. It would actually favor Republicans in the upcoming midterms more than Democrats. Now, to be completely honest with you, I would love to see it, not because I want to see 250 or 245 Republicans over Democrats in the House of Representatives. I don't care about that. I would just like to see it because it's entertaining. One state decides to gerrymander out of cycle, and now every other state gets mad and just starts feverishly gerrymandering the entire states. It'd be interesting to see it play out from a voter perspective too, because a lot of voters would be unhappy about that. Or would they? Would they be happy about it? How divided are we that we would either be, heck yes, I want my state to gerrymander the heck out of it. Screw it. I don't care if other states do it, as long as in the end we win. And how many would be like, we need to slow all of this down and get back to some common sense here. And when you look at politics as mostly entertainment, you get less mad. I've learned that over the years. So much easier when you just look at it for what it is. It's just a game that everyone else plays. And if you treat it as pure entertainment, it's a lot of fun. I would like to see something bold like that happen. And last but not least, as you know, football is back. I am a diehard Dolphins fan, but aside from just being a diehard Dolphins fan, I realized, like, I love my job. I love my career. I love my wife. I love my kids. I love my family. But just on a day-to-day, like, what am I doing with myself today? I'm the happiest on a Sunday watching football. I'm absolutely addicted to it. I watch every single game, every single play. I'm in a bunch of fantasy leagues. And this is the most exciting time of the year because NFL, we are so back. We are so back right now. The NFL offseason is the longest, most depressing stretch of the year. And we are so back. And preseason was awesome. Of course, after the first week, though, you're kind of like, all right, it was awesome to see the guys back on the field, but like, let's get preseason over with. Let's get to these games. But there's a week coming up between the last preseason game and the first week of the regular season. The longest freaking week of my life. The anticipation for kickoff, week 1 in the NFL, there's absolutely not a longer 7 days in history. It's the absolute worst. But the NFL is back. I'm going to try to cover some of it in this podcast as we go. I'm a diehard Dolphins fan, but I won't make it just about the Dolphins. We'll try to cover different things that go on throughout the NFL through the year. And if you're a football fan like I am, you know that we're in that end of that super long, depressing period. And then we're going to get a blink of an eye, pure joy, 18-week long season. And that 18 weeks is going to fly by, but it is the best. I am so glad it's back. My 5-year-old is now into it. My 17-year-old loves it. And my daughter, she's 18, almost 19 now. She can at least talk about it, but my 2 sons love it. I love it. Family loves it. Friends love it. Like, it's the greatest thing to happen to the week. It's football Sundays, and we are back, baby. It is here. So, thank you for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. If you have any questions, concerns, want to debate anything, reach out to me at eric.middleviewmedia@gmail.com. That's eric.middleviewmedia@gmail.com. If you email me, if you ask a question, if you leave a comment, I will try to respond to it in the next episode of the podcast. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe. All those things cost you nothing, and it does a lot for me. I appreciate it. We'll talk again next week. 5 head out.